This is Seeking Delphi, episode number 23, a conversation with Joanne Pransky, the world's first robotic psychiatrist. I'm Mark Sackler. The future lives here. In his iconic 1950 short story anthology, I, Robot, Isaac Asimov created the character of Susan Calvin, a robot psychologist. In 1986, Joanne Pransky took it upon herself to become what she dubbed the world's first robotic psychiatrist, and later was dubbed by Asimov as the real-life Susan Calvin. Her focus is on the use and marketing of robots, as well as the critical psychological issues of the relationship between humans and robots. I spoke to her recently from her office in the San Francisco Bay Area. Here now is that conversation. Joanne, welcome to Seeking Delphi, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark.
You bill yourself as the world's first robotic psychiatrist. In fact, you've even registered that title. That's quite a head-turner. I know it got my attention. Tell us a little bit of your background, how you got to this state of affairs, and what exactly is a robotic psychiatrist?
Billed myself that in 1986. And I did it as a way to prepare the world, the public, the National Enquirer Reading Group, for a time when robots and humans would be coexisting and living together. And I did that with a tongue-in-cheek approach, a little bit of humor, so that the public wouldn't be so afraid, in a way. And I brought alive an Isaac Asimov character, Dr. Susan Calvin. She was a robo-psychologist that he created in 1950 in his book, I, Robot. So I brought her to life, and in 1989, Asimov dubbed me the real Susan Calvin. But my mission, my business model was to bring robots onto national television, much like animals were being brought on in the 60s and 70s, so that if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a video of a robot, a real robot, to me was worth 1,000,000. And that was the best way to prepare the public. In other words, I knew I couldn't control the future, and I knew that all of technology would be increasing at an exponential rate. It would be inevitable, but I felt that my mission was to create awareness, and awareness eventually leads to acceptance. So from there, I engrossed myself literally in the late 80s, from everything from industrial robots to the burgeoning of service robots, all the way to the science fiction end. And that's what I've been doing for more than 32 years coming up here.
So if I read this correctly, even though you're billing yourself as a robotic psychiatrist, what you're really dealing with here is the psychology of the human interaction with robots.
It is, actually. I mean, I formally studied undergraduate at Tufts University Child and Human Development, and it was actually in the 70s that I was really running around, late 70s at Tufts, to the electrical engineering department and to psychiatrists at Tufts going, technology is increasing at an exponential rate, and we can't keep up psychologically, socially, and emotionally. And there was really nowhere for me to, study that or kind of follow through with my ideas on the future. But I kind of brought it like a pet psychiatrist. I figured, let's pretend it's like 1940, and I said I'm the first pet shrink. And you'd say, what, are you kidding me, lady? A dog, it sleeps, it eats, it gets walked, that's it. And I'd say, oh no, there's going to be a day when you buy a seat for it on the airplane, and you buy jewelry and matching clothing, and you send it to a spa, and you have a bar mitzvah for it. So that's what I said about robots, that one day robots would become a family member, and we would we would treat them as a family member, regardless if their emotions were equivalent to ours or similar to ours. We would perceive them as such. So I kind of took robo-psychology and upped it for the modern day and just added a psychiatrist to it. Hopefully I thought I'd get paid more, but that hasn't been the case. So yes, so robotic psychiatry really is just like pets or even children. It's not so much about the child or the pet, more of the owners, more of the humans that surround the robot and of which robots will learn from, of whom rather robots will learn from.
Joanne, the term robot psychiatrist tends to conjure up, at least for me, images of the HBO series Westworld, with the creators of the robot theme park actually putting the robotic hosts into analysis. Is this something that could actually happen in the future, do you think, or is it simply a pipe dream? And if it does happen, how far away do you think it is?
Well, I put my life on it, so it's totally reality. And when I started this in '86, again, my mission for the present, since there weren't robots for me to talk to, like on Westworld, and to analyze face to frubber or face to face and have natural language conversations with. But obviously, I've always believed, who knows, whether I was 100 years ahead of my time, 250, it's irrelevant to me. And yes, I think that Westworld does an amazing job of discussing these issues. It's probably done a lot for my career. So there's kind of an example of a need for it. In terms of when, again, I've always been wrong. I always used to say 20 years or 10 years. And so I'm always wrong on the time, but I feel very confident that it will take place, and it will get harder and harder to look at an algorithm or a software programming to determine what has gone awry, as in the case of the host on Westworld. That's a great example of how complicated it is. And even Asimov predicted that robotic intelligence may be so different from human intelligence that it will take a new discipline, robopsychology, to deal with it. And so, yes, I think I just hope I'm either, post-singularity to see it versus posthumously to witness. I feel that I would be semi-responsible as a pioneer for, if you will.
Joanne, let's move on now and discuss a couple of common terms that we frequently hear in regards to the relationship between humans and robots. The first of which is one that I've discussed more than once with previous interviewees on this podcast, and that's something called the Uncanny Valley. It's the notion that as we get closer and closer to being really human-like, as they get too close to being human, these robots may actually start to creep us out. What's your feeling about this? Is it a real issue? Is it something we have to deal with? There are some people who think it's an overrated problem. What's your feeling?
Oh, I definitely think it's an issue, and I think that there have been lots of studies that prove it's an issue, and we see it just about every day. But there's a couple of things to keep in mind, and with the Uncanny Valley, it's not just looking human-like that creeps people out, as you said, which is pretty accurate. But it's to the point where it's not where it's not quite human-like, but human enough. And it's not that it's an exact doppelganger or replica of ourselves. It's the fact that it's not quite, like the muscles and the facial movement and the eyes are just not quite human enough. And that is what creeps people out. And I think it's under the premise that I started in 1986, that awareness leads to acceptance. And we are not, as a society, particularly in the United States, we are not as accepting of humanoids or robots that look like us. And therefore, that is why at this point, I think we're at that uncanny curve and that bubble of just kind of shock and fear of the unknown. But again, if it was something like Sophia, David Hanson's Sophia is remarkable. I mean, she is the most amazing, in my eyes, humanoid in terms, particularly aesthetically, as well as in terms of her intelligence. And being a 48, and actually all of the Hansen family. And yet it has become the number one topic in the world right now, all over the world, as she becomes a citizen of Saudi Arabia. I mean, we can't get enough of her, watching her and listening to her speak. And it's because we're just fascinated. We're not used to it, but she's a pioneer. And so 10 years from now, it's like anything else. Sophia was the first, but Sophia could be the first of many different types of robots that look human in our work, in our home. And yet we may look back and say, geez, marrying another human with gender issues was an issue one day, and now I want to marry my robot. So, but there are all sorts of robots don't have to look human either. So I think it depends on the purpose of a robot, and I think like a company like Intuition Robotics has done a brilliant job with their LEQ, which is used as a social assistant for the elderly, and it's a beautiful piece of technology, but it physically doesn't have a face. It doesn't look like a human. It looks like just actually part of what you might have in your beautiful home, but it lights up, and it kind of moves its lights and moves its on the pedestal and articulates, but it's not that human face-to-face eye contact. So I think it just depends on the need, and I think that we as a society will more slowly than I would have expected or want, but have accepted these human-like looking robots.
So your mention of a robot that is not that human-like brings up the second term that I wanted to discuss here, and maybe this should have been first because it deals with the somewhat less advanced, the system that is not at all or only a little bit human-like compared to very human-like, and that would be anthropomorphizing. I know I find myself at times or catch myself saying thank you to Alexa or Siri, and then having to remind myself that, hey, this is not a sentient entity that we're dealing with here. It really doesn't appreciate that I've just thanked it. So at what point does anthropomorphizing give way to the uncanny valley? Is there a natural transition? Is there a tipping point?
Oh, well, I think that humans tend to anthropomorphize for millions of years, and including today, whether it's a car or a boat. And the Alexa example you brought up, really brings up some of the issues that I've been addressing for actually nearly 40 years. And that is, well, so for you and I who have a different background and no tech in our childhood or no Alexa in our childhood, of course, we just see this as an AI, and you said you don't have to say thank you, but what about a child who really communicates with an Alexa or a Siri or, a Google Home on a daily basis, and this is how they're learning to speak and learning to communicate, and they don't have to say thank you. And so what I always saw, or my biggest concern about technology, is that it's kind of diminishing the human-to-human relationship. Of course, this doesn't answer your question on anthropomorphization, but that anthropomorphization was the basis of how I came up with robotic psychiatry. It's exactly right. It's not how sophisticated the AI or the robot or even human looking. The fact is that we will anthropomorphize that they will have feelings. We may think that they're depressed if we leave them alone. We may assume, like the show, the British show Humans, that there's sibling rivalry. We may believe that I joke that robots may come to me, hashtag robots me too, of sexual harassment in the workplace. But I think it's more about perception than it is reality. And particularly, and I'm going off in a million different directions, welcome to my brain, but as virtual reality, augmented reality becomes more and more commonplace, I think what is real and what is not real will become very blurred. And I'm very concerned for the upcoming generations who may not have a basis for what that is.
That keys into something that I saw in one of your articles, and tell me if that's where this comes in. And that was, I think, somewhere where you said you thought, in terms of our relationship with robots, that it's the human operating system that's going to be more important than the robot operating system. Is that kind of what you're talking about here?
Yes, that's one of my favorite things, something I think I've coined. I call it HOS because I work with brilliant engineers who focus on ROS, which is an amazing open architecture system. But I've always focused on the human operating system, HOS. So I believe that very simply, technology, robotics can be used positively or negatively, and it's up to the human user and maker to have the morals and the ethics to see that it's used properly. It's that simple. And I don't think there's enough emphasis in our country on these issues like I'd like to see STEM become a STEAM, adding an E for empathy and an E for ethics. I'd like to see more focus on what it is to be human. For example, creativity, and as I mentioned, empathy, compassion. These are things that are innate to humans, and I think that will be very important as we go forward in the robot-human relationship.
This brings us now to what I consider to be probably the ultimate question in terms of robotics and artificial intelligence, and that's the notion of machine consciousness. Now, there are many sub-questions involved here. Can we create it? Should we create it? How do we create it? How do we treat it ethically? And frankly, how do we know for sure that we have created it, that it is conscious? Let's start with the last part of that question first, something you're involved with called the Loebner Prize. Tell us about that.
Well, I've had the opportunity to do some very exciting projects throughout my career. And one of them was I went to 2016 and I was a judge for the Loebner Prize, which is based on the Turing Test. And it was at Bletchley Park itself in the UK, where the coding occurred. And, so I was a judge for the Turing Test, and it was a fascinating experience. The Turing Test is basically that Alan Turing said that when a machine can pass a test that fooled the human as to its intelligence, and so if you pick apart all that, it becomes, well, what is the perception of the human, and what type of who is the human, and what a human experience is that it would be more that it would fool a human. And so it was very interesting, but I would have to say that and every contest has its rules. So according to the rules of the Loebner Prize, it was still kind of primitive. It was not difficult as of yet to decipher a human typing and an AI, a chatbot that you were communicating with. There are a few gray areas that kind of almost fooled me, if you will. But again, it comes back to, in my eyes, perception, and that's the same for consciousness. I mean, if I believe something is conscious, if I believe it has a response system, and here's the thing, though, when we discuss this, that I think we're missing, and that is that we need to talk about our own human consciousness being uploaded or downloaded into any type of body. And that is what Dr. Martine Rothblatt in her book, Virtual Human, discusses. And that's what Bina 48 is. It's a mind clone. So instead of just, I think it's more of a combination of human consciousness and machine consciousness, and I think that if we take our experiences and our personalities and our values and our beliefs, and we digitize these in a way, if you will, or our own lives, and you have a mindset of ourselves, but we upload it to a non-biological entity, this could be a conscious replica of ourselves.
This still sticks me with a question, a problem in my mind of whether we'll ever truly know if an artificial intelligence is conscious or simply doing a great job of emulating consciousness to the point that we buy it, we anthropomorphize it. How do we ever really know for sure?
Well, I'm not a scientist, so I don't think I think that I think scientists will continue on the scientific methods to prove that, and ultimately, I think it's irrelevant. I think that it is time. I think we're in the middle of this evolution where technology increases so fast and the laws are hard to keep up, and you can see that with autonomous vehicles, which are robots, which who knows, despite the way, regardless of how consciousness is defined. I mean, all these terms to me, I try not to focus on the definition of a robot or AI or AGI, or it's just because to me, it's like, as Asimov said, he never even saw a robot, but, or I think it was Engelberger that said, I know one when I see one, or something, someone said something like that. So, they're not so focused on the exact scientific definition and I think we need to focus on more on the impact and what is an example of today of consciousness, and what is it going to, how does it impact society? So I'm not so, I just think it's all inevitable. Yes, I think there will be consciousness. I think there'll be a time when it's clearly defined, or there's a barometer. I don't know, maybe there'll be something like the Pransky personality test to decipher if your robot is conscious or your AI is not conscious. So I just think there are more, I just think that it's going to happen regardless of the definition or scientifically.
I'm going to backtrack here for just a second, Joanne. Earlier on, you mentioned something called BINA 48. That does not ring a bell for me, and I'm guessing some of our listeners might be questioning what that is as well. So tell us about it.
So BINA 48 is the mind clone that I just briefly described, and she is the mind clone of a human, Bina Rothblatt, the wife of Dr. Martine Rothblatt, the highest paid female CEO in the world, and she was also, one of her businesses, she was the founder of SiriusXM. So in 2009, Dr. Martine Rothblatt commissioned David Hanson, the roboticist, to create a robot / AI that was in the likeness, mentally and physically, of her wife, Bina Rothblatt, in the sense that it became the first mind clone. But this is a real pioneering effort, because in the future, this is what we all strive for, right? To live forever, to be able to pass down our consciousness and our experiences, and be able to have a someone we love that stays forever. And Bina 48, and spent a lot of time with the person she was after, named after, or in the likeness of, rather, that's Bina Rothblatt. And today, Bina 48 became the first robot / AI to complete a college course, and that was through Dr. William Barry, a philosophy professor here at Notre Dame de Namur University here in Belmont, California. And so she completed this course, and she worked with students who had never been exposed to a robot or AI, and they conducted debates. They debated West Point, and so this was really a huge example of ongoing AI consciousness, and the first mind clone in the likeness of a human being, a specific human being.
Final question, Joanne, and this one maybe will force you to stretch your thinking a little bit. And that is, are there any questions about robotics that we're not asking that we should be asking? And I don't mean just engineers, roboticists, artificial intelligence people, futurists, but society as a whole. What are we ignoring? What should we be focusing on that maybe we're not?
Well, again, I think we should be asking, when it comes to robots, about who we are as humans. And let's say that robots will be learning from us. Our computers will be learning from us. Our devices will be around us. So who are we as humans to teach our robot children? And what ethics and morals and values do we have that we would want to instill upon our, again, I use the word children because that's how I think they're going to learn, primarily from experience in a human environment. So again, I think the questions to ask are about morals and ethics and empathy and creativity, and in that, what it's like to be human, and in order to continue creativity and to make us have something that AI or robots don't have. I think a part of that literally is more face-to-face communications with humans, a job I think of the future, that will say, well, we need 40 hours of face-to-face experience with another human being experience. And also I think a little bit of solitude from all of our devices to be able to kind of think and instill creativity. And I think the way to do that is through solitude. And also, I think the one key book in the whole world of going forward is actually Dr. Sherry Turkle's Reclaiming Conversation. And I think every human, particularly every engineer, should be reading that book.
Well, Joanne, thank you so much for your time. And here's wishing you continued good luck and good work with that robotic couch.
Thank you. The couch is going to become more the couch is going to become the patient as it is becoming more robotic itself.
By Joanne's own admission, the Robot Psychiatrist title is tongue-in-cheek and not to be taken literally. The reality in which Westworld engineers put robotic hosts into analysis doesn't exist, at least not yet. There's still much controversy and disagreement over whether we can, let alone should, create consciousness in a machine. The issue of creating machine consciousness was explored in the Seeking Delphi 2018 South by South minicast number 3. Links to that program and other stories relevant to today's subject can be found on the webpage devoted to this program at www.seekingdelphi.com. As always, you can subscribe to this series on iTunes, Player FM, or YouTube, and can follow us on Twitter at Mark Sackler and on Facebook at Seeking Delphi. My technical assistant is Mohammed Maroof. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, I'm Mark Sackler.